Alright, so the question of the day is, does my snake love me, and is my snake capable of having any feelings? And that's kind of what I want to answer in this video. As a matter of fact, if you're thinking, no way, a snake can't love you, doesn't have any feelings, I'm going to try to change your mind, and if I don't change your mind, I'm going to give you something to think about. And it really started about 6 years ago when I started accumulating snakes. And if you're familiar with snakes, they are incredibly instinctive animal, and they pretty much go from one mode to another. They go from like a feeding mode to a handling mode to a flight mode, and you can read them really easy, and it doesn't really seem like they're that smart. When you first start handling snakes, they don't seem that intelligent, and it doesn't seem like they have any feelings at all when you first get into snakes. It seems like it's 100% totally instinctual. And then I ran across this video on YouTube where a zoo had this venomous snake, and they actually trained it. And it's the first time I've ever seen anyone actually train a snake. And what they did is, everyone's afraid to go in the enclosure. It was a really big enclosure, and the snake's crawling around. They were afraid to get in there with the snakes, so they trained it to where they'd turn on a waterfall, and that was the cue for the snake to go into this little hide that would trap them and keep them there, so they could actually move the hide out of the enclosure, clean the enclosure, and put the snake back in the enclosure after it was clean. And I thought, wow, that someone actually trained a snake. I couldn't believe it. I didn't think anyone could ever train a snake. I know it's like, trying to train a cat. I've seen people train cats. It's a lot harder than dogs, and I'm thinking it's almost like the more intelligent an animal, the harder it is to train them, because they're smart enough to not really want to be trained. And honestly, I think cats are smarter than dogs, because a dog's like, yeah, I'll do this, and the cat's like, why would I do that? I'm too smart for that. And snakes almost seem like they're on a level even higher than a cat, which is kind of interesting. And it's really hard because a snake can't make any noise, doesn't have any arms and any legs. And the interesting thing is so, you can train a snake. I found out you could train it, which kind of blew me away. And then a few years later, I was talking to someone at a reptile show, and they said, sure enough, if they let the snake free roam in the house, especially ball pythons, what they'll do is they'll find the television and sit there and watch television for hours. As a matter of fact, I was watching another video tonight, and they said they had a whole bunch of snakes and they let them free roam in their house. I thought, that is kind of crazy, free roaming all your snakes. And they said some snakes will go up to the television, watch it for a few minutes and crawl away, but the ball python will actually watch the television for hours on end. And let me tell you, the only animal on the planet that I know of that'll actually sit and watch television is you and me, people. and it seems like, all the other animals have a little bit of an interest, but they're really not smart enough to sit there and be fascinated by television. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And I also found out there's another animal that I want to show you. It's another reptile. I don't know what this guy's doing. There's another reptile that I have that is extremely intelligent. It's not a snake. And let me show you that reptile. All right, so take a look at this guy. This is Speedy. He is my Greek tortoise. What a beauty he is, huh? And you look at a tortoise and you think, this tortoise, it can't really be that smart. It moves really slow. It doesn't make any sounds at all. How smart can a tortoise be? And I actually watched a YouTube channel where these guys specialized in tortoises, and they said they ran them through mazes, and believe it or not, they're smarter than mice and rats, which is pretty incredible. I want to put this guy down because he's kind of freaking out. All right, so in this video we're talking about, does my snake love me? And I think this snake actually hates me. This one actually got in the mail as a really tiny hatchling, kind of got beat up in the mail, and ever since I got this snake, I think it associated the trauma of being shipped through the mail with my presence, and it does, you know, I took it out, and it for some reason, you know, it just associated that trauma with me, and ever since I've actually had this snake, it has always been a little snapper. Every time I go in here, it takes a bite, and the last time I had the camera this close, it actually took a bite at the lens. This snake is crazy, and you know, I've actually handled this snake quite a bit, and for some reason, I just cannot tame this snake down. I had it around my shoulder for one video, kind of around my neck, and it was biting everything. It was biting my hand, biting the camera, and then finally it chilled out, and I did a little bit more filming with it. I thought it was kind of taming down, and then it went back kind of into this crazed aggression mode, and for some reason this snake just does not like me, and I just can't snap it out of it. You know, it's, you know, similar to, you know, any other animal. I think once they decide they really don't like you, it's really hard to change their mind, and this is one of those animals. All right, so I put Speedy back in this enclosure. It's really not that good to hold a tortoise like that for very long. They really don't like to be held, but I just really wanted to show you that. It's really interesting that you see some of these reptiles and you think, you know, especially if you're looking at some of these reptiles at the shows and you see them in these enclosures and you think, you know, it doesn't really seem like they're that smart because they're not moving very much, and they can't talk to you. They really can't display their affection like we can, like a dog would display its affection. But I really think that some of these animals are really knowledgeable, they're really smart, and I think some of them can show affection. As a matter of fact, when I'm feeding Speedy and I go up with a plate full of lettuce and greens and stuff that's all chopped, and I lay it down in front of the tortoise and I go, hey Speedy, here's your greens, here's your food. And what he'll actually do is he'll run halfway to it, and then he'll look up at me and he'll like start climbing towards me like he wants to come up and give me a kiss. I was like, that is amazing. This thing is pretty smart. And the other thing you have to think about is a tortoise can live for, you know, 50 to 100 plus years. Some of these tortoises can get really, really old, and it's, you know, you think about a mouse or a rat, and then the mice and the rats are pretty smart. They can go through a maze and figure stuff out, but they only live like 1 to maybe 3 years for the oldest rats. And really, I think the tortoise has the advantage to where it lives a lot longer and it can learn a lot more in its lifetime compared to a rat or a mouse that lives only for a short period of time. And especially if you're talking about ball pythons, they can live 30 years. So maybe they're a little bit slow at first, maybe they're not really, you know, catching on to things, but, you know, eventually, you know, I've never really actually seen someone try to really train a ball python or a snake, and except for that one time at the zoo, which would be a pretty interesting experiment to see if you could actually train a snake to go through a maze or something like that. The problem is it doesn't eat that much like a rat, where it would just, you know, eat and eat and eat, and you could keep giving it treats over and over. So it might be challenging to actually train an animal like this. And the other thing you have to think about too is I've seen a lot of snakes breeding together. And as a matter of fact, I made a mistake when I first started out in snakes, and I put 2 king snakes in the same enclosure full time, pretty much year round, which was a mistake because they pretty much went into breeding mode, and they both went off of food and they didn't eat for a long time. But it was really interesting to see them interact. And what actually happened over that whole year is they pretty much were at each other's side, pretty much on top of each other the whole time. As a matter of fact, I'd come in, I had this little, it was like a cork, kind of a round thing, and they loved to get on that and in the branches, and it seemed like every time I looked in there, one of them would have their head right on top of the other one, and they were always side by side with their heads on top of each other. And let me tell you, every time I looked in there, I thought it was so cute, and that, you know, to me looked like, you know, a form of affection from snake to snake. And they weren't breeding, they didn't have their tails twisted together, they weren't actually copulating, they were actually showing affection from snake to snake. And the other thing you have to think about is a snake can actually dislike you. I think they really can. I have a snake that really doesn't like me, a ball python. Every time I open the enclosure, it takes a bite at me, and it's a pretty old ball python, and it's just, for some reason, it doesn't like me. So you take all this stuff and put it together. You know, a snake that, you know, snakes can have feelings for each other. Snakes cannot like you. Snakes, they're pretty smart. They sit in front of the television, which kind of blows me away. And they actually can be trained in certain circumstances. You put all that together, hey, why can't a snake have feelings for you as well? And I've seen some people on the internet, you know, they put a snake around their neck, and the snake will start squeezing a little bit, and they go, oh, the snake loves me because it's squeezing me. I don't know if that's the case, but I do know that some snakes are more comfortable with me, and I think that they show their affection differently than most animals. So if you ask me, I think this snake loves me. I don't know. I can't really prove it. It can't really talk to me, and it's you know, my opinion versus yours. But you take all the facts from all this, put it all together, and I think some snakes really enjoy the company of people. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.